Okay. Hi, everyone. I think we're live. Welcome to today's webcast. I'm so excited for this one. It's a little bit different than the webcasts we usually do. But I'm Catherine. I'm the communications manager at NaNoWriMo, and I'm here with Erika and Alyssa, who are two amazing designers. And I'll let them introduce themselves in just a second. But we're doing our webcast today on book layouts and how to create and design your own layout. It's super exciting because it's something I don't really know much about, so I'm looking forward to learning. Yeah, we're doing this as part of our I wrote a novel, now what program. So if folks wrote a novel during November and they're like, okay, I have a first draft, now what? We've been giving a lot of resources on revising and editing, and if you want to go into publishing, resources for that. So I'll drop the link in the chat for all of our Now What resources. We've got tons of good resources here in the video description too, that we'll learn about as we go through. But yeah, with that being said, I will hand it off. Erika, do you wanna introduce yourself first?
Sure. My name's Erika Schnatz. I've lived in Portland, Oregon for, over a decade now, and I've spent the last 5 years as a production artist, and now I'm a senior production artist at Image Comics, so I'm laying out single issues, trades, hardcovers, and before Image, I graduated from a book publishing program at Portland State University, so took a bunch of classes in design and put together books, and it was great. And just I've been surrounded by all books all the time over here.
Awesome, thank you. Alyssa?
Hi, so I am Alyssa Alarcón Santo. I am primarily a graphic designer and illustrator. I went to school at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston for illustration, and over the last 5 or so years, I've kind of ended up doing a lot of book design. So I am currently the creative director for the sci-fi magazine Planet Scum. We are a triannual short story anthology publication. So we got a bunch of these books, which Erika collaborates with us on as well. So I do all of the book design and layout for that, as well as for other freelance clients. And I am the, all-purpose designer for NaNoWriMo. Yeah.
Yeah, we're really happy to have you on board, because if it wasn't you, it would just be me in that. So
it's very fun. I like working with you.
Great. Cool. Well, we have a bunch of really great information to get through today, I think. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to you guys. But I just want to say, as people are watching this, if you have any questions that come up as you're watching that you want to know, feel free to put them in the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat and pulling questions to ask at the end. So if anything comes up, let us know in the chat. All right. Yeah, take it away. I'm so excited to learn.
Yay! All right. So starting off, before you even get into the book design process, it's a really good idea to figure out if your book is ready for this step, because it's book design pretty final. Like, you don't want to go in with a bunch of proofreading, copy editing changes needed to be done, because that makes it very likely that some weird typos and stuff are gonna slip in. Plus, if you're working with an outside designer, all of those rounds of revisions add to the cost and everything. So before you are ready for the book design step, definitely have it as copy edited and proofed as you can get it, nice and clean, and it'll be easier to design, or your designer will be very grateful. It's much easier on the design end if you have something that won't change too much, versus going in and being like, no, we need to change this character's name throughout the entire book, and then it's a mess.
Yeah, I think we should stress that today what we're going to be talking about is how you would build a book in InDesign, which is the primary program used for typesetting and book design. And we're also going to discuss how you can get your book laid out if you do not want to be doing it yourself. InDesign is not the most accessible program in the world. It's quite fun once you get into it, and like you can teach yourself. I'm self-taught, but it takes a lot of time and a lot of mistakes on the way to get there. So like Erika was saying, you really, really, really don't want to be doing any kind of text editing in InDesign. It's not really a word processing program. It's a design program with words. If you have anything to
yeah, there is a spell check. So like that's part of my process. I always run a spell check, but if the word is spelled correctly, but it's the wrong word, InDesign is not going to catch that. Yeah, there's a lot of things that like the designer can catch, especially if the amount of times I've accidentally typed W in because it's a shortcut I use all the time in InDesign in the text. So always run spell check to catch those things, but just know that, yeah, it's good to have a clean manuscript before you jump into messing around in InDesign.
Yes. Bullet point 1, be done with your text before you start laying it out.
Yes, absolutely.
Let's see.
Oh, and I guess we can talk about why even bother? Like,
right.
You might have a manuscript in Microsoft Word and be like, I can export it as a PDF from here and sell it on Amazon, CreateSpace, whatever they have going now. But just things to consider about book design that can really professionalize your ideas and just as maybe you wouldn't take a flyer that was strange from a stranger on the street. I don't know. It making a nice, pretty package. I think it helps your ideas get across. It helps people take your ideas more seriously. I know I feel better about charging more money for something that's been professionally designed and put together. And if you're going the self-publishing route, I think hiring a designer or having the design skills is gonna just like set you apart from the folks that are just exporting a PDF from Microsoft Word and all the quirks that come with that.
Right. Yeah, I think generally if you're trying to sell your work, people are a lot more likely to buy something that looks like what they're accustomed to seeing a book look like. So if you are physically publishing, it just looks a lot nicer if you have, like, you know, all of your margins in order. You have your pages nice and clean. And then also if you are laying out your book kind of with the tone in mind, you can get a lot psychologically across to people with the choices that you're making. So for example, if you're writing like a nonfiction book and you choose like serif fonts, then that comes across as, you know, more professional and serious, which I think we'll get a little bit more into that. I'm jumping forward too much. But yeah, just having like a clean book design can really convey what you're trying to convey with the legibility that you would like to have, so to like easily enable someone to read your book.
Yes, that's very important. If you want people to read your book, it helps if it's easy to read. It has clear headers, clear table of contents. You want to make it easy for people to find and digest your ideas and share them. So yeah, having a book designer or working at it yourself definitely leagues above just like sending somebody a Microsoft Office document and being like, hey, read this. And they're like, okay.
Yes. You can also, if you are not necessarily publishing your own book and you are submitting to a magazine like the magazines that I put together, you are also able to format things in a way that is easy for the editors to read, and we will like you very, very much if you are kind of familiar with, like if you're writing in Google Docs, for example, if you familiarize yourself with the format options there. So if you're not, you know, adding extra enters or extra tabs that you don't necessarily need, people will be a lot more likely to publish your stories because it's so much easier to bring that over into InDesign. So that's something to keep in mind when you are getting ready to move your manuscript forward.
Yes, the less formatting you have on your Google Doc, Microsoft Word document, the better. Like italics, bold, get those guys in there. Anything else like poetry, I guess you would want line breaks and that sort of thing. That would be important. But for the most part, you don't want to enter like a bunch of additional enter spaces between paragraphs, and because all of that is something that the designer or you will have to go in and strip out in InDesign. So it just, to make streamline things and make it easier for yourself down the line, to have like pretty bare bones. Like it might not be pretty to look at the unformatted, but it makes it's a good base to work with when you're bringing it into InDesign, and then you can add all the bells and whistles and fonts and whatever you want there. But it's much easier if everything's stripped away and doesn't have crazy double spacing here and 2 paragraph returns there, and consistency will make everyone's life a little bit easier on the design side.
So for those of you who are not intending to do the layout yourself, or are intending to kind of teach yourself InDesign, we have put together a list of resources that you should be able to download. I believe there's probably a link, maybe in the YouTube comments, I'm not sure. But there is a document in there that has a bunch of links to helpful tutorials and lists of places that you are able to get your book printed. One good tip for the website like Ingram Spark is one of the ones. I believe NaNoWriMo has a promotion running with Ingram Spark right now as well. You can look through their site and it will have a page with all of the specs that you will need for the manuscript. And so one of my big tips is look at the website that you're planning to use and see if they have specifications. So that'll tell you, sometimes they have templates too, but that will give you kind of like the dimensions that they would like you to have, the color space that they'd like you to be working in. So that way you don't have to go in and change things after the fact. It's better to have that set up beforehand. So you don't have to go back in and kind of like re-export it 500 times. And I think we are going to kind of go into more about how to use InDesign now. Am I right?
Yep.
And I just want to say that that document that you were talking about, I put the link in the chat, but that and a bunch of other resource links are also in the video description. So if any point during this webcast you're like, I don't know, what are they talking about? I want to read more. It's in the video description. So
perfect.
Yeah.
Yes, like Alyssa was mentioning, the first big picture item you need to figure out is your trim size. And with a lot of printers, they'll have a set, maybe 2 or 3 sizes you can choose from. Really common for a book size to be between like 5 by 8 to 6 by 9 for fiction, novella, short stories, that sort of thing. Nonfiction kind of lives in its own world because those can be all different sizes. But unless you're trying to do something specific with your design to have like a really tiny book or like a gigantic, I don't know, coloring fantasy mystery, you're probably going to stick with a book that's in the range. So it's really smart to go to a bookstore, check out your bookshelf, see what size books are in your genre, see what people expect. If you have a book of short stories or essays, maybe you have a smaller trim size to kind of make your book look more physically like it's got more substance to it. Because meanwhile, if you have like a 5,000 page fantasy epic, you might need a larger trim size to fit more words on the page, so people aren't like carrying around a telephone book on the bus. But yeah, it all depends on medium. Children's books and textbooks are a whole other thing, but there are if you even like Google standard trim sizes, a lot are going to be in I think this is 5.5 by 8.5.
Yeah, probably.
Or this one might be 5 by 8, and this is like 5.5 by 8.5. This is a pretty common trade paperback size.
This one is an A5, which is, I believe, 5.25 by
Okay.
8.5. So it's a slightly smaller size, but it's still one of the standards. And just to clarify, trim size is just the size of your book.
Size of the book. Yeah, exactly. It's the size it will be when the paper is cut down at the printer. Yes, and if you go outside the non-standard trim size, they're the standard sizes for a reason because of how many pages the printer can fit on a page. So if you go with like a out of the box size, it might be more expensive down the line because they just can't fit the same amount of pages on the giant rolls of paper they're putting out. So it's just something to keep in mind. But if you're going with a self-published, a lot of them will have clear guidelines on like what size the book can be. So once you have that information, then you can start setting up your InDesign document.
Yeah, and then you'll also want to think about what kind of binding you want on your book when you're going in. So the two kind of most standard ones are saddle stitch, which is when it is sewn down. So that's usually good for like zines, or I guess a lot of like poetry collections, things like that, something really like tactile, but pretty small would be saddle stitched. So I believe that after a point you are not able to do that anymore if the book is thick enough. So that's for like under 100 pages, like quite a small book.
Comic books a lot of times are
comic books.
It's like anything you
Staples,
could staple. Once you get, I think we start going into perfect bound, like once you get beyond like 52, 60 pages, it might make more sense to go perfect binding because it starts getting too big for it to lay really nicely.
Right. Yeah. And then perfect binding is when it is glued in. And so then it has like this flat spine here. This is a perfect bound book in Grimspark, which I can vouch makes it quite easy to choose whatever page colors you want. They have a few different page options. But yeah, so perfect binding is generally what you would go with for a self-published book. What's the other one? Lay flat. I guess they have lay flat. It's another type of binding.
Like
for like art books.
Spiral, the only case where you want to do like spiral or wire binding is if you really need it to, like a cookbook or maybe some kind of large activity book or technical manual, something where the reader will want the book to be open without them holding the book open, basically. But that's not as big for cookbooks. I feel like you don't see that kind of spiral binding too many other spots.
No, sometimes it's usually like activity books I've seen. Ooh, we are going slowly through this. We should probably speed up. Let's talk margins and bleed. So for your margins, one thing to keep in mind is that when you are making a physical book, the margin on the interior needs to be wider, or else your words will disappear into the crease, which is not ideal. Looks like Erika might be looking for an example or something. So that was a mistake that I made initially, not realizing that, oh boy, you really need to have that. So if you search, there are a lot of good resources to explain kind of like standard ratios that you might want your margins to be. So I think that'll probably be easier than us spouting off a bunch of numbers right now. You can find them online very easily if you Google standard margin ratio.
And the thicker the book, the larger the interior margin you're going to want to be, because all those pages, more and more gets lost in the spine the bigger the book gets. So with the comics I work on all the time, it'll be fine for a single issue that's only 32 pages to have lettering that's pretty close to the interior margin. But once we do a trade or hardcover collection, sometimes I'll have to move the lettering out because it's going to get lost, because you're not going to get the same lay flat situation that you would in a single issue. So something to consider.
You'll also want to consider that your margin will need to be wider if you have a header or a footer running through. So, the bottom part where you have the page numbers or book title or whatever you have going through, that section will also need to be wider to accommodate that. I
think a lot of just basic design guides say probably like you want at least half an inch around and maybe a little bit more on the interior side. So just as a base rule of thumb, to have room for your thumb around margins, it's good to do at least a half inch. And then if you want to go really fancy, and I have some books that the margin is like 2 inches on one side, and sometimes that gets a little bit too much, but designers like to design, so sometimes they get a little crazy with their
and I mean, you can get creative with it depending on what the content of your book is. Like, again, it just, you want the tone of the book to match the content of the book. So one thing that's important when you're working in InDesign is toggling between preview mode and live mode so that you can just get an idea of like, what does this actually look like? I can share my screen really quick and show you what that means. Hopefully this will work. So this is a file that I have up, which is a story from the book that I keep talking about, which is actually illustrated by Erika here. And we have included a sample InDesign document in the resources that you can download and if you want to play with it. So this file will be available. But you can see, you know, this is the live view. You can see the margins here. You can see how the footer is set up down here. So if you toggle into where is it? I just use all of the command codes. So you can toggle into preview mode and you can just see what that looks like and zoom out and just kind of take a look at it from far back. That will help you a lot while you're designing to kind of get an idea of where am I? How do I turn this off?
Let's see.
I think we're talking about body text now.
Oh, yes. Yes.
So I guess I should share screen again, and you can kind of, I'll show while you're talking.
Yep. General rule of thumb is your body text is probably going to be between 10 or 12 points. That's a pretty standard size. And then depending on how many headers you have, those can range from, like we have on this page, a little galaxy is the biggest thing, the most important thing, the title, and then everything kind of works from that hierarchy.
Yeah, text hierarchy is really important. So you generally want whatever the most important, like most pertinent information should be the biggest thing on the page. And then just kind of deviate from there. But yeah, this one I have it at 30.
And 10. Nice, yeah. And another thing to talk about, that little, the A on top of the A in the character area, that symbol is leading, which back in the days of type, was actually like a piece of metal that they put between lines of text. But now, which is where the word leading comes from, it was a piece of lead. But now it's something which is one of the big things between Microsoft Word and InDesign, where you have a lot more control over how the text sits and flows on a page. You want to have, at least I think 10 points to 12 point leading. There are a bunch of ratios for this that you can find online too, but you basically want to make sure that the space between lines makes it nice and readable and is consistent across all of your body text sort of thing. So people aren't like, why is this paragraph squished together and this other one is really spaced out? It's nice to have really consistent measurements across your book. That helps for ease of reading too.
So there's a line where it becomes too much. Like you don't want the lines too squished together, because let me show you what that looks like. If I moved this leading down to like 8 points, obviously, like that is not legible. So I was told to do what size and a half of whatever your text size is. So my text size is 10. I've chosen 14 as the leading, but I could go up to 15. I have also chosen to add a little bit of extra space in between each paragraph line, which is because I personally am dyslexic, and it is difficult to read blocks of text that are just on top of each other like that. So I have tracked it out a little bit more than you traditionally would, just to make it a little bit easier to read, which is nice for me, but hopefully is also nice for others. So that's something to keep in mind when you're designing is this legible for a dyslexic person? There are a lot of us. Let's see what else. Yeah, like I was saying before, you are able to choose kind of between serif fonts and sans serif fonts. So serif fonts are the ones that have the little like lines at the edges that make it look a little fancier. So like Times New Roman is a serif. Sans serif is anything like this that is more rounded and doesn't have those kind of accent lines, which is generally more informal and is more easily legible. So that's something to keep in mind, especially on web. If you're making an ebook, you're going to want that to be a sans serif. See, what else is this?
Serif, you have the little feet, and then sans serif is no feet. And it can be really nice to combine them. I know in one of the books I worked on, the headers, because they're to make them stand out, I made them sans serif, so no little feet on those. And then the body text has serif font because that's pretty traditional for at least physical book publishing. It helps with legibility and readability. I think most of the time it was recommended to me that you use sans serif like Georgia or Times New Roman or Garamond for your body text. But it definitely has, sans serif has an aesthetic of being like clean and modern. So it makes a lot of sense here for Planet Scum because we're doing sci-fi stories.
Science fiction.
So it makes sense to have this like really clean font with a lot of white space or negative space around things. It kind of just adds to the whole aesthetic of the book.
Right. Do you want to talk about widows and orphans really quick? I feel like we're going to run out of time here. So we should see what in here is necessary.
Widows and orphans, the saddest named things. Book publishing has a lot of weird terminology, but basically a widow is, let's see, widow is like a whole line that's kind of left by itself at the top of a column.
If I have any in here. Probably not.
An orphan, I think, is usually just one word that's like hanging out there. It's very hard to avoid sometimes, depending on what you're doing. Columns of text, it's easy to have widows and orphans. It's not a huge deal. It's only a real, it might disorient the reader if there's like one line from a paragraph at the top of the next page that they have to turn. Yeah. It's not too big of a deal between one page and the page adjacent to it. It's more page turn related things.
Right. Generally, you just want to keep the full thought together. So if you have like one clause that is informed by the next clause, you want to keep those clauses together as much as you can. So there's a lot of manual adjustment that you can do to keep those things together. So that's generally for widows, right? The lost line. And then orphans are when you, like this one here, when you get one word that is trapped on the next line. And sometimes, like Erika said, it is unavoidable. This here was unavoidable, like it is just not going to fit on another line. And if I try to adjust it to add that second word down there, obviously that is just not aesthetically pleasing. So in my experience, dialogue is usually where you get trapped into having to keep those. So stylistically, those are what you want to keep an eye out for when you are doing like the nitpicky text editing. Let's see right here, there's nothing that can be done here. This is just stuck. What else do you want to talk about, Erika?
We can talk about just a paragraph. It's like ragged,
paragraph styles.
Ragged right versus justified. Yeah, this has a big aesthetic impact on your book too. With columns, the justified text makes sense when the text is spread out to hit column to column. In things more like poetry, or depending on apparently I use justified text in like everything. But to get like a softer feel, having non-justified or ragged right text kind of lets,
which I can demonstrate here. So this is justified. You can see that it's a square. Everything is squared, so it's aligned at the edges, and sometimes you have to have hyphenation in order to make that happen. So ragged text would be where it's not justified, so it's got the ragged lines. And it is not as clean or easy to read, but like Erika said, it's very good for things like poetry where you really want to highlight the line breaks. I feel like generally you would be using justified left like this.
Yeah.
And then we can talk about paragraph styles in InDesign. You are able to save presets for your type styles. So over here in the corner, you got these paragraph styles. So for me, I went through and cleaned them up recently. So for my body text here, you are able to save kind of how you want things. So what your basic formatting is, keep it left justified where you want your line indent. I was also told for the first line indent, which is the tab, you want that to be the same size as the leading. So my leading is for 14 points here, and my first line indent is 1p2, which is 14 points. There's a lot of, this is another spot where it would be really helpful to use a tutorial. It's really complicated stuff, but this will make laying everything out a lot easier because you will be able to automate it. I can go through and change any new added text to make sure that it is consistent, and it will always be consistent if you're using your paragraph styles. Getting in the weeds now.
They're so organized and beautiful. Some of mine, I mean, it also depends what project you're working on. I have so much stuff that's so deadline driven that you kind of skirt some of the best practices, but it's good to learn how to do everything the right way before you start breaking all the rules in order to hit specific deadlines. And if you work with a designer, they're going to set up your book properly.
Right.
So that if you need somebody to work on it in the future, they should be able to get you all the files you need. But we should talk about graphics in a book and bleed. Because do you have any, well, I guess the cover has bleed for Planet Scum.
Yeah, I don't have any of those files open right now. I'd have to go searching for them. But yeah, I don't have any full bleed.
Basically, bleed is when you have an image that's going off the page, and you want bleed is like an extra space around that page.
A little bit of like an extra margin on the outside of the page.
So that when the printer cuts the page, if they don't cut it exactly, there's some leeway. It's really important in illustrated books, children's books, anything with art. As working on comic books all the time, my entire job is basically checking to make sure that the bleed is filled out in case the printer pages shift and then you don't get like a white stripe on an outline. But with a lot of fiction stuff where you're not having images go off the page, it's not really a concern. But it's something to think about if you have something that's a lot of text and images. It's the printers will tell you how much bleed you need to set up. Usually it's about 1/8 of an inch, I think we usually have on our books.
Yeah, I think 1/8 of an inch is the standard. But like I was saying before, if you go onto the printer website, that should be something that they'll specify for you in the specs. There's usually a separate section that has specs for illustrations and artwork. Yeah, I mean, so obviously it's really difficult to abridge the book design process. It's really, really difficult to break InDesign down into bite-sized pieces, which is why we glossed over it a lot. And I feel like there's just so much more that we could talk about here. But I think just generally, the best thing that you can do is go through books that you like and just kind of make notes on what it is exactly that you like about them, and just think visually when you look at them. So like, okay, do you like the way that the paragraphs are laid out? Do you like the way that the headers look when you're looking at them? What do you like when you look at the page numbers and the style for that? And then kind of try to incorporate that into your own work. And if you feel like InDesign is not your jam, that is good to know so that you can go find a designer. Do you know of a place that would be easy to find?
I know I have done some book design work from Upwork. Some people, I got some work that way. But but yeah, there are whole companies that, especially for self-publish, will take care of the design and marketing and book cover, because the book cover is a whole other.
Oh yeah, that's a different person.
Yeah, a lot of times it could be. I've done both, but it's a different skill set between the book cover design and the interior design. Back when I was in grad school, part of what we did was a working press, and I don't think the same person ever did the cover and the interior design. It was all done by two separate people.
Yeah.
But I feel like anywhere where you can find people that'll do graphic design, probably browse people's Dribbble, Behance, whatever portfolio websites people are using these days.
Or Instagram, you can search hashtag like book designer or typesetter or something like that. I know a lot of people have portfolio work on there.
Yeah, and it's hidden in the credits of like just about every book somewhere. It should say who designed the book, so you can kind of start getting clued into like, oh, I really like work this person has done, and then you can just Google them and see if they're available for freelance work. Or I feel like everybody just knows in the design world. I feel like if somebody can't do it themselves, they know like five other people that they could. Yeah, there's a big network of that. That's how I've gotten a lot of the freelance work, because somebody starts working with me, they tell somebody else that they had a good experience working with me, and then I pick up more work, and everybody's happy. And so
ask your designer friends.
Exactly.
They probably know a guy.
Exactly. Somebody around there is really into InDesign and can help you with your book.
Yeah, so if that was not enough information for you, as it should not be, because that was like the bare minimum that we could possibly talk about, take a look at the resource guide that we have included. I included a list of Skillshare classes, which some of them are quite good and pretty thorough, and you do need in order to use Skillshare, but they have a 7-day free trial. I also included, I have a subscriber code that you can use to get a free month. To be transparent, that also gives me a free month if you use it, but free month for everybody, not a bad thing. I've used Skillshare quite a bit in my self-teaching for all the different Adobe programs. It's a very good resource, but we've also included a list of free resources that would not require you to have a subscription to anything. And then, we've included the sample document that you can kind of go click through and play with. I think that's it for me, presentation-wise.
Thank you so much. That was it was honestly super helpful just to hear like the big picture topics of like what's important. I think for me with not a design background, it's like, oh, okay, these are kind of the things I should focus on, and excited to dig through those resources.
Sorry if we were too jargony. That it's hard to come up with that, like break it down.
No, it was great. We do have some questions in the chat, so
awesome.
I'm gonna be asking some questions from the chat, and just a reminder to people who are viewing, if you have other questions, feel free to put them there, and we'll try to get to them in the last 20 minutes.
I'm also happy to demonstrate things in InDesign if you have like a demo question.
Yeah,
great. Cool. So let's see. Denise Long asked, is there a way to add a symbol or like a curlicue or something in between new scenes to designate a point of view?
Yes. Oh, I can show you that right now. All right. So that the thing that the symbol itself is called a glyph. So you are able to add glyphs pretty easily. Let me share my screen here again. As you can see, I have some in this document right here. This was part of an ongoing theme through the book where the clock changed as you went through. So I have a paragraph style set up over here, which is my glyph section break. So for that, I took out all of the spacing and everything and made it so that it is just centered. You don't want it to be taking the tab from anything else, because otherwise that will look kind of silly. And there is a glyph section. I thought I had that tab.
It's right next to your paragraph styles.
Paragraph style.
Right at the top.
Oh, it's up here. Haha, there we go. So you can see here in the glyph window that you are able to look through what symbols each font comes with. So this right here, this is wingdings. This is what wingdings are for, friends. I want that you've been wondering your whole life what the wingdings are for, and this is it. So these are, I guess, just the regular wingdings, but there are a whole bunch of different ones. So if you have one that you want to insert, you just go in, find your glyph that you like. You can just double click that and it'll pop it right in for you. Anything to add to that, Erika?
Yeah, it just depends on the font. Some of them have a lot of weird symbols that you can insert. I also use the glyph panel a lot when I want to add M or N dashes.
Oh yeah.
There might be a shortcut somewhere, but it's just
yeah, there is
for me to I don't know.
I think it's
Unicode.
shift command dash is the M dash.
I know I'm always fixing that on back covers. We do a lot of quotes from other people, and our house style is to use M dashes for attribution. So I'm always digging into the glyphs panel, to find the M dash. Yeah,
big M dash fan.
Glyph panel rules.
M dashes should just be on the keyboard, in my opinion.
Yeah, right. Well, it is. You just have to do, if they're on a Mac, it's shift command dash.
Right.
To bring it up. Yeah. I don't know about it.
Or you just copy and paste it like I do.
Or copy and paste.
Yep. Copy paste everything.
Awesome. Also, I'm so glad to know what wingdings is for now. It's
a
question that's plagued me since I was 9 years old. We have a couple other questions that I think are kind of related. I know you were talking about how covers are usually a totally different thing. So B asked, what's a good resource for learning how to do a cover? I'm not sure if you included any of those in your resources.
We didn't, so that would be illustration. That's an entirely different skill set. So if you are an artist, it's fairly straightforward. You can, make your own cover art, and then you would set it up with the completed art in InDesign kind of as the background and add text on top of that. You would want to illustrate it with text accommodation in mind. So you kind of want to go in with like a mock-up of, okay, so I want my text up here, and then I'll have my like characters or whatever in a space that is not obscured by the text. But yeah, it would generally just be a different person entirely. I do a lot of interior design and cover design. Sometimes it is the same. I am the same person doing it. However, it is two separate invoices for two separate projects. They're not the same project, and they're usually charged differently.
That's true. Pricing is different. If you do have an InDesign account and Adobe Stock is part of your subscription, there are a lot of templates on there now. So if you want to do something that you're going to you just want to put something together to show friends and family, or you want to do something self-published, depending on your Adobe subscription. I know the one I have through work, we can license a bunch of stuff. So a lot of those will give you the files, and you just go in and change the text, and they have like something pretty basic that you can use. I know folks, I always recommended Canva to the people who weren't super design minded in the book publishing program I was in, just to put together graphics. Sometimes that can be helpful if you put together what you're thinking of in a program like that. So to share it with your designers so they know kind of what the vibe you're going for, that can be really helpful. Or have, if you're going into book design, having comp titles, like something to compare it to. I know it helps the designer a bunch if you have something they can reference and then kind of work from there.
Yeah, I usually have my clients make a Pinterest board with images that they like. So it's really easy to find, book covers, existing book covers on Pinterest. So you make a board of like, okay, this is the thing that I like. So then your designer can look at that and know, okay, like this is the direction that you want it to go. It's really important to be able to clearly communicate your vision so that the designer kind of knows tonally where they're going, because the designer hasn't necessarily read your book. So you really want that to be consistent. There's a tangent.
It's good. It's good to know. Yeah, a lot of times stuff that I've worked on, I'll design it and skim it, but I won't have time to like read every line. So that's why it's so important to do a lot of the copy editing and proofreading beforehand, because the designer is like thinking on a different mindset where it's more like trying to Tetris words into place versus like thinking about paragraph structure and that sort of thing. Words just become like another object you need to put into place versus something. There are definitely designers that can proof. Like I do a little bit of proofing with my work, but it's mostly checking for if I see something that's clearly a typo, I can, or like a word that's broken up in a weird way. But when you put in your, when you go into interior book design mode, everything just becomes a shape that needs to be moved around versus like, I don't think this sentence reads strong. Like your designer's probably not going to have time to give you critical feedback on particular language you're using. They're just there to make the words look good.
Yeah, proofreader is more of like an editorial job, and it's like key to have somebody that can proofread what you're doing. And so the designer is largely just working on aesthetic. So I think that's a good note, is book design is a lot of different jobs to come out with the final book.
Yeah, sounds like it. We also had a comment in the chat. It's like a reminder to proofread your covers when you get them back from the designer.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
I just worked on the 4th printing of a comic that had a typo in the back cover for the first 3. So, yes. You
really can't see it after a while, especially if you've been working on something for a long time. Like it just
just the more eyes you can have on something. We just fixed something that was going to print, and the writer was like, I've read this page 30 times and didn't catch it, and he put a preview page in his email newsletter, and a fan caught it and was like, hey, this is wrong. And he's like, oh, and we had to go in and like, oh, let's fix that. So the more eyes you can have on your manuscript, and especially print proofs, like that's the time you make all the fixes before anything gets final approved and sent to the printers. Because you don't want to get a book. The first children's book I self-published, printed for a grad school project, one of the words was spelled wrong, right in big text on the page, because I didn't I did it all in Illustrator for some reason, and I didn't run spell check, and lawyer was spelled incorrectly. So extremely easy for your eyes to just like totally glaze over stuff like that. Very important to have lots of help looking things over. I feel like that's why the acknowledgement section of a book, where you're like, this many people read this book before it was published. It's like, yes, because they're going to catch all this weird stuff that makes it in.
Yeah, special thanks to your friend who's the best at catching spelling mistakes.
All right, we have a few other questions here. So I know that we were focusing on InDesign today, but Pauline asked if there is a substitution that might not cost as much.
Unfortunately, there really isn't. There aren't a ton of book layout programs out there. I don't know if you know something, Erika.
I think some printers offer their own sort of software that you can use on their page. Unfortunately, Adobe has just kind of like monopolized this field. People used to use Quark, but I'm pretty sure everybody that uses Quark now uses InDesign.
I haven't heard of Quark in years.
I'll get old files that are in Quark. I'm like, I can't open this.
Is there an affinity?
I think so.
Let me Google this really quick while you talk.
Unfortunately, it's kind of like InDesign or nothing, which is really annoying that they have this behind it, especially once they went to a cloud subscription service and not just like pay for the one program and then you have the program.
It appears that there's one called Affinity Publisher, which a lot of people use Affinity as an Adobe alternate. I have never opened it. I cannot vouch for it, but that is what Google says.
That's good to know, though. Like if you're planning on self-publishing, like you really want to make sure if the company you're self-publishing with, like if they have their own design stuff, because if
Yeah.
not, then you'll probably have to be using InDesign. That I think that's a really good thing to know. So
yeah, I mean, InDesign would be like what you would want to be using if you want to have like quality control. But yeah, if there is an option through the publisher, it might not be quite as responsive, but it's good to take a look.
Yep.
Yeah, I self-published a book of poetry like way back when, and I think it was one of those things, and it was really frustrating to do because I didn't have any design experience, and I was trying to nudge things over to the right.
Yeah. It's much more. Yeah. I think a lot of the things that are offered through printers' websites are kind of like a what you see is what you get sort of thing. So
they're really hard to use.
Yeah, they're not the exactly the benefit.
Like the Blurb.
Oh,
Blurb has their own, and I have
I
never been more frustrated trying to use a proprietary program. I gave up and learned InDesign because I hated it so much.
Wow.
I think I tried that with the Shutterfly had their own gosh, trying to lay out a picture or a photo book and that versus once you know InDesign, you're like, why would I?
I know. That's the thing, is using InDesign is going to speed it up a lot. Like and again, I don't know about Affinity, that might be a viable alternative. Yeah. But just using the appropriate software for the job is going to make everything move a lot faster, regardless of what that job is. Yeah,
that makes sense. We have another question about, because I know you were talking about how most font is in like 10 or 12 point. So CB394 asked like if there are rules about font, and what if somebody has access requirements, like they can't see text that small.
I guess that would apply to an ebook more. So they do make like larger text copies of books, which would generally be a secondary file where you have sized the font up quite a bit. So for that, I don't know if there's a standard for larger text size. I think at that point you probably just could do whatever feels right to you, since it would be an alternative version. For ebooks, that's an extremely complicated topic that requires slightly different layout structures, but you are able to, specifically with Kindle, I haven't designed for other readers before, but I assume it's similar, you are able to export a responsive file type that you can change through the actual reader. So that is more difficult with a book like what I was showing with columns. They call it reflowable, where you're able to alter the text. So within Kindle, you are able to like up the text size, change the different contrast. You're able to change the font to something that's more easily read. They actually have a dyslexia font within it that you can use, that I personally use. That does make it a lot easier to read quickly, because the line weight is heavier on the bottom so that your eyes can track more easily. It's very cool. But yeah, so I guess the answer to the question would be, if you are setting up an ebook with the intention of making it size accessible, you would just have to set it up differently. And you can find resources for that if you Google like reflowable EPUB, I think would probably be a useful keyword. Erika, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think if you know that you're working on a project where your audience is going to want, I feel like the 10 to 12 point size is for a general audience sort of thing. But if you have all those paragraph styles set up in InDesign and have everything laid out, it is not too difficult to like make a copy of the book, change the paragraph styles, and it'll automatically change everything. Yeah. So if you want to go in and increase the point size a couple bits up to like 14 or 16 to make it more legible, because you already structured everything and set it up, it wouldn't be too complicated.
Yeah.
And if that's something you wanted, that would be a good thing to let your designer know, that you want like a standard size and a large print edition. And the folks that do ebook publishing, that it's a lot of coding and behind the scenes things that I knew how to do 6 years ago when I was in grad school. But it's a lot of like tagging
Yeah.
And it's totally doable. You just need to find the right person that's got that skill set.
Yeah.
Or just the right combo. Gosh, the amount of YouTube tutorials too that are out there.
Yeah.
Like I constantly coming up against design questions, I Google it and find somebody who's done like a 10-minute video on YouTube. So like search engines are your friend. They're great for answering all your weird little questions, like what does this menu do, and like how do I do this?
And if you have a specific problem, if there's a specific problem, just add solved to your search query and it'll pull that right up.
Yeah.
Pro tip.
Yeah.
Perfect.
In our list of resources in the Skillshare section, I believe, let me double check that. Yes, there's one of the Skillshares is specifically about how to format an ebook.
Awesome.
That's great. Thank you. All right. Just a couple of last quick fire questions.
Yes. Okay. We'll go faster.
No. It's great. These ones are pretty simple. This is just like, how do you feel about this thing? How do you feel about non-serif fonts for chapter titles and drop caps?
Ooh, as an illustrator, I love drop caps.
Yeah, drop caps are fun.
Beautiful. I use a lot of sans serif header titles. It really, again, it just goes with the tone. So, for example, the book that I was showing you, for my example, I just used Impact, which is like a classic basic font, which is obviously, they call that a display font when it's one that you would not use for your body
text. Yep.
So that one, we actually have our own proprietary font that we use for the headers, but I swapped it out with Impact for this. But yeah, I use a lot of sans serif fonts. It really, again, what do you want it to suit the content? So like if you are doing like a romance novel, you might want like a cursive chapter title. And I think that is a really fun place to get creative, the title headers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I use drop caps in, let's see if I can share my screen real quick.
Ooh, yeah.
Not this book, my other book. We did a project in grad school where we took something that was public domain and did the entire book, designed it start to finish, which was very cool. And I did the illustrations for it too. But you can see, because this book was written in, 1900, I didn't use any sans serif fonts because I don't know if they existed. So
I do not believe they did.
Yeah, they weren't a thing yet. But yeah, I used a lot of small caps for the titles and a lot of serif fonts across the board for this. And
small caps are when it just has capital letters, but they are the height of the small letters in.
Yeah, they're fun.
Yeah.
They're good for specific. Yeah, definitely a specific vibe when you're using small caps. It's usually when you want to make something look old.
Yeah.
And lots of.
And you've got your grid on.
Oh yeah, my baseline grid that high that clunks up everything. But yes, lots of love serifs. In the other book that I designed, we used sans serif headers, and then I had the serif body text. But for the chapter type, oh yeah, look, I had to type. We had text messages in this story. That was it's an interesting challenge when you're working on short stories. So we had it was an anthology title, so we had the author, we had the book title, some of them had headers, we had footnotes, we had it all. There was this was a big book. It was great. It was about marriage equality before that was passed across the United States, but lots of different things to consider. So with nonfiction books and essay collections especially, there's a lot to think about when you're laying out the whole thing.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This has been so great and so informative. We're at time for today, but I want to thank you for sharing your expertise with us. Lori in the chat said very informative and accessible for a person like me who is new.
Oh, good.
Good.
That's what we were hoping for.
Good. You did it. You achieved it.
We did it.
Yeah. So yeah, if people are watching this and were interested and want to know more and learn more, I would definitely encourage you to check out all of those links in the video description. So many good resources there, and we'll be providing more events, related to kind of editing and publishing your books throughout the rest of February. I believe NaNoWriMo is hosting like an Instagram takeover in a couple of weeks as somebody who's going to talk
cool.
about book marketing. So kind of covering the different things there. So I'll put in a link to all of our upcoming events as well, if people want to check that out. And just before we go, is there any last thing that you would like to tell people about or share? Or,
Oh yeah, I'll plug this microcosm book, A People's Guide to Publishing, because they use some flowcharts I made inside. But like really solid guide, especially if you're self-publishing. It discusses everything about the book for the folks that aren't going to go to a graduate program to learn how to build books. Microcosm's great. This book is like $20 and filled with information. It's got info about ebook formats, and Joe and Ellie, who run Microcosm, are good people. I think it's been updated pretty recently, so it's got good information about the whole process.
It's a very good book. Yeah, I guess. Is this where we do our come look at our projects?
Our plugs.
So I've been talking about Planet Scum, my sci-fi book, this whole time. We have a new book that's going to be coming out next month, and we are about to open up submissions again in, I think, 2 weeks for issue 15. Oh my gosh, we're up to 15. So yeah, if you are a sci-fi writer, come submit. We pay. If you like reading sci-fi, we've got a lot of it. We got a lot of cool artists like Erika. We do a lot of stuff together, so find our combined projects.
Awesome. That's super exciting. Definitely gonna check that out. Awesome. Yay. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today, and thank you so much, Erika and Alyssa, for sharing your wonderful knowledge. And we'll see everybody next time.
Thanks for letting us talk about books.
Yeah.
Always. All right.